It's day 10 of our readings in Lent 2021, and that means it's the last reading for this week. Tomorrow's Sunday, and then we'll begin again on Monday. So we finished this week with 2 Samuel. Yesterday we had 1 Samuel, and it showed the transition of Israel's leadership from judges to kings. 1 Samuel ends with the death of Saul, the first king of Israel, which paves the way for David to become king. And David becomes king at the start of 2 Samuel, and really 2 Samuel is an account of his reign. He goes and takes Jerusalem from the Jebusites and makes it his headquarters. He then brings the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem and makes it the capital city. And David's reign, at least very much in the beginning, is one of prosperity. He defeats enemies, he enlarges borders, and he brings relative peace to the nation. And David is always looked at through the rest of the Bible as the greatest king Israel had, and a great leader to be looked up to. However, David's reign as king was not without flaws. There were problems, and probably the most well-known account occurs when one day when the troops were going off to battle, David doesn't lead the troops, he stays behind, sends Joab out leading the troops. And while he's at home idling away the time, wandering around on his roof, he sees Bathsheba, the wife of another man. He desires her. He sends for her. He's king after all. He commits adultery, and then things get complicated because she discovers she's pregnant. So what does David do? He sends for her husband, who is one of his fighting men, Uriah, who's at the front line, and he comes back. David says he wants a report of the battle, but secretly he thinks Uriah will spend the night with Bathsheba, and maybe he'll conclude that the child is his own. But Uriah is more noble than David. Interesting enough, Uriah is a Hittite, not even an Israelite. But he says he will not sleep in the house with his wife while his colleagues are at the front line in battle. David gets him drunk, and still Uriah refuses to sleep in the house with his wife. So David changes tacts and compounds the sin. He sends Uriah back to the front line with a letter to Joab, the military leader, to say put Uriah at the fiercest part of the battle and then withdraw and leave him isolated so that he's killed in battle. This happens, and David thinks he's covered everything up. After Uriah's dead, David takes Bathsheba as one of his wives. David thinks he's got away with it, but God has seen everything, and God is not pleased. So God sends Nathan, a prophet, to go and confront David. And when David is confronted, he immediately has overwhelming remorse. He repents, he fasts, he swaps his clothes for sackcloth. God, in his grace and mercy, doesn't take the kingdom away from David. But there are consequences, and David's reign will be plagued by many troubles from that point onwards. Now the part I want to read today is from 2 Samuel starting in chapter 11 going into chapter 12, and it's where Nathan the prophet confronts David by using a story. So we're going to read that together now. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. The Lord sent Nathan to David. When he came to him, he said, "There were 2 men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had brought. He raised it, and he grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveller came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveller who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over, because he did such a thing and had no pity." Then Nathan said to David, "You are the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hands of Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all Israel and Judah. And if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with a sword and took his wife as your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own." If you do have a moment, read Psalm 51, which is a psalm David wrote following this incident, and it's a psalm of repentance. What is the lesson from this passage? Whatever we do, and we might think we get away with it, the Lord always knows. And it's much better to bring it to the Lord and resolve it with him before he raises it with us. Till next time, have a blessed day.